All right, junior high, I'm going to go ahead and go over your history packet with you. That would be the history activity sheets and timeline for chapter 27. So go ahead and make sure that you have your packet out and pen or a pencil. Some of you have already probably filled a lot of this out. That's totally fine. This is just an opportunity for us to go through it together, and then if you had questions that you didn't understand, I'm going to explain those in the first part of this video, and then I'll go back over the answers in the second part of this video so that you can self-check it. But this will be chapter 27, One Century Ends and a New One Begins. You should have already read the material. You should have read this chapter. If you haven't, pause the video now, go and finish that reading. If you haven't watched the first video on when I was going through that material and kind of hitting some of the highlights, you need to go back and watch that video just because you can't answer the questions if you never read about the topic. So for the first page, what you need to do is you need to ask your parents or grandparents or a friend or family or just someone who's been around a little longer than you what they remember about the fall of the Soviet Union, which you read about in your chapter 27. And then you just need to write some of the things that they remember here. It's just an opportunity to kind of get a secondhand or a firsthand account, talking to them, something that they actually witnessed, something that they heard about in the media. It's an opportunity for you to hear what they remember. So go ahead and get some of those thoughts and write them down there. And then for your vocab, you know the drill by now. You'll just need to write down 2 words for your vocab, okay? Make sure you write the definitions. Again, if you would write the words underneath this top line, the one right under vocabulary, and then if you would write the definitions down on these 5 lines, that would just help me when I'm scrolling through to be able to see that you actually got 2 words. Sometimes it's a little hard to figure out what's supposed to be what. So some of the questions that you'd have to answer, how was Mikhail Gorbachev different than other Soviet leaders before him? You go back to the section and read about Gorbachev, where they kind of compare him to some of the other leaders. What changes did Gorbachev bring to the Soviet Union that helped bring an end to the communism there? And again, that's just going to be in the section on him, but we'll go over those answers in a second. What makes modern terrorism worse than terrorism in past centuries? This is a pretty interesting question. Obviously, we face terrorism and terrorist attacks, and so the question that the author's posing is, why is it so much worse today than it was in times past or in past centuries? And we'll go over the answers there, but to kind of get you thinking along the right lines, think about what weapons are used today versus weapons that were used then. Do you think one is probably a little more destructive than the other? With how easily intelligence can be transferred, do you think that it's maybe easier for them to know how to attack and where to attack than maybe it was back then? So just a couple of things to consider before we actually go over the answers. For your worldview checkup section, it says, being a modern missionary. Does your family take part in one of the organizations that help impoverished people around the world? If so, write about it below. If you do not, take time to look up how you could reach out and be the hands and feet of Jesus either in your own neighborhood or in a bigger sphere. Write about it below. Bonus if you illustrate it too. So what this is basically saying is, does your family help support impoverished or people living in poverty around the world? So a lot of third world countries, think some of the more rundown countries that people might go be missionaries to. There are a lot of different programs and companies that they specialize in taking donations and helping places in the world like that. But a big one that maybe you're not thinking of is just missions. If your family gives to missions, then what that means, through the church, and some of you may not know this, but giving missions would be when the offering plate is passed, you can put in your tithe for the church, but you can also put in money and designate it and say that you want it to go to missionaries. And what that does is it helps support missionaries so that they can keep doing the work that they do in other countries. So that would be a great way that probably most of your parents are involved in. So ask them about that, and then also write out how you could be kind of a missionary in your own neighborhood. Talk about how you could be a missionary to those who are struggling, right here in Indian Trail or Monroe or Rock Hill or wherever you are. And then go ahead and write out an illustration or a cartoon of you helping people in need right there in that big box. So Feel free to be as fancy as you want with the drawing. Obviously, because we're not in class time, you have a little bit more time to spend on it. But go ahead and really think it through. Think through how you can be a blessing to others in need, and then work on making that actually happen. I mean, it'd be kind of silly if you knew, oh yeah, I could help people this way, but I'm not going to. Like, that's kind of selfish. And so if you can think of those ways to be a blessing and somewhat of a missionary right here, then, I mean, you should live that out. On the next page, go ahead and look at the map on page 336 of your student book, and then there are some questions below that you can answer. What pattern do you notice on the map concerning the countries that belong to the EU? That would be the European Union. And those that do not, what patterns do you notice on the map concerning countries who are applying to become European Union members? That's a little confusing. We'll go over the answer for those in just a second. But look at the map and then find what countries belong to the European Union, and see if you can find some differences between the one who belong and the ones who are trying to become members. Why do you think some countries or people see the membership as a good thing and others see it as a bad thing? So why do some people think it's good to be part of the European Union, and why do you think some people think it's a bad thing? And again, we'll go over that in just a minute. Abandoned Places of the World talks about a place in Ukraine called Pripyat. It is an abandoned city near Chernobyl. It's near a nuclear reactor, and so that explains why it's abandoned. Obviously, you can't live that close to nuclear reactors because of all the radiation. On April 26, 1986, so way before you guys were born, an explosion at the Chernobyl nuclear station released massive amounts of extremely dangerous radioactive chemicals into the air. Not the kind that are going to give you superpowers, the kind that are going to kill you. Pripyat was built to be a place for the workers of Chernobyl. With a population of 49,000 people, the town had a large hospital, 15 schools, 25 stores, movie theaters, factories, an amusement park, and many other convenient amenities for workers and their families. After the explosion at the number 4, the entire population of Pripyat was forced to evacuate. More than 30 years later, the city is a ghost town. Frozen in Soviet Union 1986. School books open to the page last being worked on. Toys and clothing are strewn throughout homes as families gathered the necessities before fleeing. So it shows you how quickly they had to evacuate. Like, they didn't even have time to close their school books. They just left them there. I'm sure some of the kids were like, oh yeah, I'm going to leave this behind. Which I know a lot of you would probably do the same thing too, so shame on you. But communist propaganda posters and flyers line the hallways at community gyms, and every clock in the town is stuck at 11:55. That's the exact moment the electricity was turned off. And so the clock hasn't moved at all since then. For years after the explosion, according to some observations, plant life showed some rather interesting side effects, including glowing from the high doses of radiation. Although touring Pripyat and the other surrounding villages has become much more popular in the last few years, one must first obtain a government pass giving permission. All visitors must undergo radiation testing after their tours. I'm sure that you could go to YouTube and search Pripyat tour, and I bet that there is people who can show you what that city looks like now, which would be really interesting. I've seen some videos like that before where people, basically investigate and go and explore like abandoned towns and abandoned cities. And you have to do it like 50, 60 years later because of the radiation and stuff, but the stuff that they find is incredible because it's all stuff that's like from way long ago and nothing's been touched, and it's really, really interesting. I'm sure some of you have seen videos like that too, going to abandoned amusement parks or something. There's actually a popular video like that on YouTube. I hadn't really thought of it, but it actually might be the amusement park from Pripyat. So I would encourage you, if you're curious, at least just what that might look like, go ahead and search out a video like that. It would be a pretty cool experience for you all to see. So then in the section, Think Like an Explorer, think about the stuff that would be left behind in a city of nearly 50,000 people that left all at one time. If you had a chance to go to Pripyat, what would you explore first? So think about it. The entire city is abandoned, like instantly. People left behind everything, half-drunk coffee cups, maybe even a fire burning in, the fireplace that just smoldered out. Maybe some kids were out playing in the backyard, and so you still have, like a soccer ball or something like that, but everyone just leaves. Try to think what that city would look like. And if you're having a trouble with that, think about, the city that you live in. Whether it's Indian Trail or Monroe, Rock Hill, Charlotte, it doesn't matter. But think about if everyone just left all of a sudden. What do you think some of the things that might happen or get left behind would be? And now go back to, if you were able to go to Pripyat and explore it, what would you want to explore first? For me, I would probably want to explore the stores first, because I would be so curious to see all the shelves lined from 1986, all the stuff, the styles there, and I mean, it's a Soviet Union, and so like the clothing stores, what were people wearing, just random stuff like that. So I would want to check out like the mall or the clothing store, or a grocery store. That'd be cool too, grocery store. But what about you? What would you want to explore first? And then the year 1986 was really not that long ago. There's a good chance that your parents were alive at that time. Talk to your parents and see if they remember it and what else was going on in the world at that time. So kind of the same as the first question. Just kind of talk to them about their experiences, things they remember, and then jot some of their thoughts down right there. Then you have your timeline. Describe what happened at the Summer Olympics in Munich, Germany in 1972, and who are missionaries and what are their goals. So a couple of easy questions there. Again, refer to your notes. But I'm going to scroll down now, and I'm going to go ahead and walk through the answers for these activity sheets. So give me just 1 second while I find this page. You all remember from class time how difficult it is for me to find the right page here. These notes are really confusing. But page 243 is where we start. I'm almost there. 244. Obviously, that first page, there's no right or wrong answer. You just have to write down your parents' thoughts and then the vocabulary words. On page 245, the first question, talking about Gorbachev, he was more open to communicating and working with other powers of the world. So he wasn't like closed off to the rest of the world. He was okay with making alliances and peace treaties and diplomacy. He made an arms agreement with the United States and then went out of his way to open communications with China. So he was trying to work with other people to basically have a win-win, to make sure that everyone was getting better and having good opportunities. Number 2, he changed the government into a presidency with a parliament and changed the justice system. So rather than having, like a dictator or someone who just, jumps into power and tells everyone what to do, he changed it into a presidency where someone is voted into power, which is obviously a little bit better because then the people have a little bit more say in what's going on. And then number 3, modern terrorism uses modern weapons of mass destruction, which makes for much more deadly results. I mean, think about it. Would you rather have someone come at you with a sword or a nuclear bomb? It's just a little bit easier to fend off of a sword. So the type of weapons that are used today make terrorism way more dangerous and deadly than it used to be. So while technology has a lot of benefits, there's also a lot of downsides to it as well. Number 246, again, you have some creative control. I don't remember exactly what that question is, but any of the questions that have to do with just kind of your perspective or your thoughts. Be creative, be expressive, but you don't necessarily have to worry about getting a right or wrong answer. I just want to see that you put some effort into putting your thoughts down on paper. On page 247, it says exact answers will vary, but students should be able to note that the most of the members are in Western and Central Europe, and that most but not all of the other countries who are not members are in Eastern Europe. Likewise, students should also recognize that most of the countries applying for admission to the EU are in Southeast Europe, which they may recognize as the region called the Balkans. So if you look at that map on page, I think it was like 233 or something like that, 333. I don't remember. It was down there in that question. When you're looking at that map, you can notice that most of the members are all in Western and Central Europe, and that the ones who are not are Eastern Europe. So it shows a little bit of a divide kind of right down the middle there, separating the West from the East. And then for the second question, again, exact answers will vary, but students should be able to realize that some will find the benefits extended to members, such as easier trade and travel, beneficial, while others may be concerned about the level of power the EU has over individual nations. And then for your timeline, in 1949, that would be C, 1955 would be E, 1962 would be B, April 26th of 1986 would be D, and then finally you have A on December 25th of 1991. For number 2 there, Palestinian terrorist group, the Black September kidnapped and murdered Israeli athletes who were competing at the Summer Olympics in Munich, Germany. So that's what happened. Palestinian terrorists kidnapped Israeli athletes. And then for your final question, in centuries past, missionaries were individuals. So this is just explaining who missionaries are and what they do. In centuries past, missionaries were individuals or groups of individuals who trained long hours to travel into foreign countries to spread the gospel of Christ. So, in short, it is people who take the gospel of Jesus to people in other countries, or really just anywhere. In our time period, we are all missionaries. There are countless opportunities to give of ourselves to the lost and hurting right in our communities, states, and countries. And there are just as many ways we can allow God to use our time, finances, and prayers to support the growth of the kingdom of God all over the globe. We've talked about this in class before. We are all missionaries. Just because we don't spend the majority of our lives doing it, or just because we don't actually go to another country to do it, we all have a responsibility to tell others about Jesus Christ, and that makes us all missionaries. And so we ought to fulfill the Great Commission. So those would be your answers for Chapter 27. Again, make sure that you read through the material before filling out the packet. That way you know what you're talking about. And I will send out Chapter 28 this next week. Only have a couple weeks left in the semester, guys. So I know this is a little bit different, but I hope it's working for you. I hope you're learning. I hope you're enjoying learning. I miss being in the class, being able to use my whiteboard with y'all. But it is what it is. So y'all stick in there, and then looking forward to this next week and seeing y'all once all this is over.